down in the dirt. Been real bad. I've been real bad boy on the town all night. Starting to calm down with the morning light. I've been down in the dirt. Down in the dirt. Down in the dirt. Down in the dirt. All right, it is Friday morning. Hopefully everybody out there is having a good Friday morning. If it's not Friday morning, don't tell me. I have no idea what day it is most of the time these days. I'm sure with the pandemic, you guys are having similar problems. We've got a great live stream today. We're going to talk about, and I've got a series of these. I want to talk about Shopify. I want to know more about Shopify. We don't do a lot of Shopify work, and I'm going to see how many times I can say Shopify throughout this Shopify live stream, just to get it out of my system. And so we have a live stream next week where we're actually going to have someone from Shopify come on, and we're going to talk about what they claim is the myth that Shopify is not flexible. And so, I had several people reach out from the promotion of that stream wanting to express or see some views from people other than Shopify themselves. And so we're going to bring a Shopify partner on, Trellis. Isaiah from Trellis is going to come on, and we're going to talk about scaling Shopify to its maximum potential from the partner side. So I'm going to fix myself a little E.H. Taylor rye here. But first, we need to get our sponsors going because, they help finance all of this fancy equipment and stuff we've got going on here. So let me figure out how to run that real quick. See, it's been so long since I've live streamed, I'm not even sure which button it is, but here we go. I'm doing Magento, and in all of that time, I've never seen somebody who can... Well, that was weird. It didn't start from the beginning. You don't live stream for a little while and things just go crazy. Let's see here if I can figure out how to restart that sucker. Apparently I was doing some tests earlier and I messed something up. That's life for you. Anyway, come in proper hosting. And with increasing customer demands, slow is just not acceptable. MageMojo understands the needs of Magento merchants because they focus only on Magento hosting, and they've built a reputation as a premier Magento hosting provider. They've built an incredible Magento cloud hosting platform so that their customers enjoy the speed, reliability, and scalability of cloud servers. And if you geek out about technical details, ask them about how they provide automatic horizontal scaling for free. With cloud hosting from MageMojo, there's no more worrying about flash sales or Cyber Monday traffic. If you operate a Magento store, then you need to check out MageMojo Hosting. The link is in the description of this live stream, or you can just go to magemojo.com. That's MageMojo.com. All right, now that we got all that out of the way, even though it was a half of a commercial run, that's probably the length that commercial needs to be anyway. Basically, hosting sucks. And if you need hosting, call somebody like MageMojo. You don't want to deal with that crap yourself. I know I don't. So if you would, welcome to the stream. Isaiah, thank you for joining us this Friday morning.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because, I want to just get rid of any misconceptions and just kind of tell people what we've seen and where we've seen the limits. And in full transparency, we work with Magento just like you and BigCommerce. So it's not like we're saying, oh, Shopify is always the best for every scenario, but there are a lot of scenarios where we have to kind of push the limits of it. And we're still seeing how far that can go, basically.
Yeah, if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do there at Trellis.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wearing my Clavio shirt just because I wanted to wear something to represent the Shopify ecosystem. And I was trying to find what made sense for that. They had a great event in 2019. So yeah, Trellis is an e-commerce digital agency. Kind of started all over the place. I have like more of a marketing background originally, so I actually started out in SEO and then quickly realized, probably similar to you, kind of like saw e-commerce as this like more fun thing to get into, and SEO just kind of was like, oh, this is not fun anymore. Trying to write people's content and all that crap. So got into e-commerce, and in that time, around 2012, got into Magento, and then over time, kind of realized that there's more to the ecosystem, and that's when we started getting into Shopify, BigCommerce, and kind of look at the greater ecosystem. And we were very fortunate to have like one of our good friends, local friends, who runs a Shopify agency. Just we merged with him in 2018, and that kind of really accelerated our Shopify growth and kind of strengthened that side of our business. And now we see ourselves more on the higher end of Shopify. Like, if you want your really basic Shopify site, there's a lot of people out there that can do that for pretty cheap. And that's not really where we focus. We're focused on more of that, like pushing it to the maximum, basically.
So with that, I'm assuming most of your builds are going to be Shopify Plus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there might be a few that are not Shopify Plus, but for the most part, it's Shopify Plus. Yeah.
Okay. And I assume when you say that uh, e-commerce, you found e-commerce a lot more fun than SEO. Like us, you found that it pays better. That's what you mean by more fun, right?
Yeah, so I think in 2012 when I was doing SEO, I kind of came to the conclusion around that year, 2012, 2013, where I was like, it's all going to be driven by content, and I'm not going to sit around writing people's content for all these industries that I don't, I can't be an expert on, all these random industries and clients that we're dealing with. And I felt like e-commerce was actually a better way to help them with SEO, because if you didn't have your products online, getting 1,000 products on your website is going to be a lot better SEO than a 10-page content website.
Awesome.
So,
Now we're going to get into the meat of this a little bit. For those watching, post your comments in the chat. We're live streaming right now on LinkedIn and YouTube. So post on either of those if you have any questions, or if you want to participate in the conversation here as well. And we'll get to those questions as we go through. So we'll address those throughout the live stream. So if you would, let's kind of start from the basics. What is it, just Magento and Shopify, or are there other carts you support as well?
yeah. So, I mean, actually, when I started out, we did everything because we didn't know any better. We were just like, we'll figure it out. And we were just a bunch of kids just like doing. And so we did like Drupal commerce, open cart. I did a few open cart sites back in the day. So I've seen pretty much everything except, we didn't really work with like Hybris or Demandware or some of those platforms that are just, so expensive. It just didn't really make sense to play in that area. But yeah, BigCommerce, Shopify, and Magento are the main ones. I have a pretty strong WordPress background, so we do some WordPress. I know WooCommerce, but I am not a fan of WooCommerce. I might be a little biased there, but I really don't like WooCommerce. I try and tell people never use WooCommerce except for like some extremely rare situations. So mainly what we're seeing is Shopify and Magento. We love BigCommerce. We think they're a great company. I know you work with them, but for whatever reason, it just seems like Shopify and Magento fill most of the market with the demand that has been coming to us.
Well, they're definitely a big overlap between BigCommerce and Shopify. And so if you're more comfortable, I understand how that would fill that market for you. But when a merchant comes to you and they're looking for e-commerce, especially seeing how we're talking about scale, right? How do you determine which platform is the right fit for them? So I'm a merchant that needs scale. That just instantly says Magento for most people. How do you say, okay, let's go to Shopify and scale that?
So I've really been thinking a lot deeper about this, especially with coronavirus. Like, in the past, I feel like you could get away with, building a site for 6 months and getting a return like a year later. Now people are looking for fast returns. So we've really been focused on like ROI and how are we going to help them make money. So the way that we look at it is honestly from a revenue perspective. Like, I mean, you could do $500 million. I think Kylie Jenner's site does like $500 million on Shopify. So the way we look at it is like, okay, how can we scale their revenue, and are we going to run into limits with that, with what their use case is going to be? And if the answer is no on Shopify, then we typically gravitate towards Shopify because we feel like it's a lower cost of ownership. It's a little bit easier for them to manage. It's just easier to manage as a platform and do a lot of things. Obviously, if their use case is really complex and they have all sorts of crazy stuff, then we might say, okay, we're going to run into some of these issues, which I can get into a little bit more.
Well,
So,
can you give me some examples of issues
yeah.
you
So,
may run into? Like if you're doing this, like maybe an example from your past, somebody who's doing this thing, and you're
yeah.
like, okay, that excludes you from Shopify.
Yeah, so some of the main areas that I would say, and I wouldn't say excludes, like there's always a way, right? Like you could
Of
always find a
course,
way, but it could be so expensive and
it
complicated
makes
that
it
it's
not
not
the
worth
right
it.
fit, right? Like what
Yeah,
makes it not the
exactly.
right fit? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say like large scale internationalization can be a problem, although we are solving that problem. So I would say Magento has a stronger platform for that because obviously the multi-store, the store views, like the three tiers, whatever you want to call it with the multi-store. So it's much stronger for that internationalization if you wanted to scale out like all the different regions and countries. So with Shopify, you'd actually have to build individual stores for those. Like literally you'd have to
Right.
have like clone your store, and that can get kind of cumbersome to manage. So what we're doing with some of this stuff is moving it to a PWA, so it's one front end, but then like individual stores like rolling up to that one front end to make it a little bit easier to manage. But then there's another app called Zonos. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're pretty cool. You should check them out.
I'll do that.
Zonos. And they're like an app, I think mainly for Shopify, but I think they do all the platform or all the main platforms. And basically they're like a cross-border fulfillment app. So they'll like kind of like take over your checkout and make it like personalized. So you could technically use that, but it's not like true solution for country. But there are ways to scale on Shopify multi-country, but Magento is definitely, I'd say, a more like native solution for that. And so that's one of those things that we'd have to talk to a customer about. Like, can you live with this kind of like hacked version, or do you want something that just like completely natively supports it? So
Well, yeah,
that's
I think
that's one
that's
example.
okay. Don't go ahead. If you got another one,
Yeah,
please.
let me give you like the three or four main examples. So
Okay.
that's one
Yes.
that's really common, and that would also apply to like multi-brand, right? Like let's say you wanted to run
Right.
10 brands on Magento. I think we have some clients that have run like 10 or 20 brands on one Magento instance. You can't do that with Shopify. You'd have to create 20 stores. The other is like large, complex catalogs. So Shopify's catalog structure is pretty basic. It's just like SKU and then variants, and that's it. And then there's limits to the variants. You can't do like 10,000 variants. Like with Magento, in theory, you could have like 10,000 SKUs rolled into a configurable product, right, or a bundle
Right.
product. You can't do that with Shopify. There's like a wall that you're going to run into with the catalog. So if you have like a really complex, large catalog, a lot of that is in B2B usually, but it can be in retail. Shopify might be tough there. Or like they don't have bundled products, so there's like bundled product apps. But then you have to have an app for that, and let's say you want to integrate with that. Now you're integrating with an app, so you can see how this gets pretty
It
messy
gets
pretty
messy.
fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that, and we've done it. we So that's the other one, like complex catalogs. That's where we say, hey, maybe this isn't the right fit. And then the other is like if you have some sort of crazy custom feature. So we've built a lot of custom private apps. So basically, like if you look at the app ecosystem and you can't find the app doesn't do what you want. And then they have this like Shopify scripts functionality for the enterprise, for the plus, so that you can do some stuff with that, but it's somewhat limited. Then if you run out of all of these options, right, you run out of like all the core options, then you have to basically build what's called a custom private app. So now you're talking about building an actual, like basically a software, not like
Right.
with Magento, you're building an extension. I'm sure you guys build a quick little mini extension. With this, you have to build an actual app, host it somewhere. Maybe it's Mage Mojo, and it would tie into the APIs of Shopify. But now you're limited to the APIs of Shopify. So that could get pretty messy. That could get pretty expensive. Versus maybe it would just be easier to build a quick Magento extension for that custom need work. So those are kind of like the main areas where you see how you could say, maybe we can do it in Shopify, but is this the right fit? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what Shopify or Shopify fanboys are going to use to defend, and not just Shopify, SaaS platforms in general. When you come to them and you say it's not flexible, they're like, sure, it's infinitely flexible. Like you can do all sorts of things through the API, but it really boils down to, is that the best way to do it? Is that the simplest way to do it? Is that the best way? Are you going to create this mess of spaghetti integrations that you're going to have to maintain long term? Whereas on open source, this could be a fairly simplistic setup. Is that kind of what you see it as well?
Yeah,
It's
I
not
think
that you can't do it. It's just that maybe that's not the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I think you have to weigh the pros and cons, because I do think, we have a site that we got up and running on Shopify in like 2015. We built them a custom private app that we still maintain today. So it's been 5 years. So, and they've been very happy, and they've scaled on Shopify. In fact, they're moving one of their other brands to Shop. So it's worked for them, and they felt like, even though they had to build this custom private app, it was better than being on, they were actually on Magento before. For them, they felt it was better than being on. So I think there are scenarios where it's okay to do that. You just have to be aware of what you're doing and what the ramifications are, and that trade-off versus, okay, would I rather live with Magento and the cons that come with Magento? Like every platform has their cons, right?
Sure.
We could probably spend 10 hours talking about the cons of all three platforms.
It might be a useful stream. We should probably do that.
Yeah, invite me to that stream. I'd love to join, about the cons of all the platforms. So I think it's just kind of like, that's what we try and do, is just like weigh the pros and cons, and we're trying to get as honest as we can. And sometimes that's a challenge, because the partners, pleasing the partnerships and being honest with the merchants about the cons and the pros sometimes gets us a little bit of trouble. But our goal is to just try and help the merchant make the right decision. So.
Yeah. So has there ever been anything you haven't been able to do? Like, has there ever been anything where a customer said, I want to do this, and you're like, that's just technically not possible on Shopify?
Yeah, I think there have been. I wouldn't say that it's technically impossible. I think it's just that we decided it was so ridiculous to do that we basically be building this like completely separate software that I was just like, well, we might as well not do this. So it was more just, and there was, I think, some areas with the API limitations we were concerned about. Actually, there was some stuff with the API where they didn't have the ability to like edit the tax API, or there were some limitations in the API. Like, to be honest, this is like a deal from a while ago, so I can't remember all the details, but I remember there was like an API that we had analyzed and that we couldn't do. Like, we were like, that just, they don't have that with the API, and we can't like make them. Yeah, we're like, we can't make them change their API. Unfortunately, we're not that big of a partner, so.
I understand. And you guys are doing, are you doing a lot of headless at this point?
We're moving pretty hard in that direction. And the reason we're moving pretty hard in that direction is because we're seeing so many of the cons of the platforms between all three. We feel like the front end development is problematic on all the platforms, to the point where we feel like headless is the solution there, but it's still early. We're trying to move people in that direction, but it's not quite as mature, obviously, as some of these platforms yet. So
right. And
so we're
get
pushing
back
hard.
into. I want to get back into that, but we do have questions in the chat.
Sure.
Sam in the chat here on LinkedIn says, I have clients from Shopify who moved to Magento 2, and they have a complaint that Shopify has SEO and SaaS platforms. That Shopify has SEO and SaaS platforms have limitations. And I'm not sure I understand that completely, but I assume they want to move from Shopify to Magento 2 because of the limitations.
Yeah,
your thoughts.
Yeah, there definitely becomes a point where, so there are some SEO limitations to Shopify where you don't have, it's a little bit harder to control the URLs and control like the complete code base that you would on Magento, and that can kind of create these SEO limitations. And then you're usually using a bunch of apps, so like, you might have 5 or 10 apps, and all these apps are injecting things into Shopify via APIs and all of that, and then those often have some sort of quirks or limitations. So that's where I think you get to a certain point where, if you're okay with managing Magento from an admin panel standpoint, you might have a lot of benefits to using it, because you could kind of roll that up into just one code base. not a bunch of external apps that are triggering all these APIs and things like that. So
Right.
I don't know exactly what he means by what the limitations are, but we've seen problems and just scalability issues with that. But there have, like, our director of marketing can speak to this better than me, but he feels that Magento's definitely got some advantages from a marketing perspective than Shopify.
Okay.
So,
Which is funny because it's perceived the other way. Like, it is
so
perceived that Magento has technical advantages, but from a marketer's perspective, Shopify is just easier to deal with.
yeah. So the thing is, you have to kind of balance the pros and cons of what's going to help. Like, the goal of the merchant is to grow revenue, right? So if you're a merchant that's only doing 2 million online, Magento might be really hard for you to grow and manage, and like your budget might be so limited in your tech. Like, a lot of times these merchants just aren't very technical, right? So the learning
Right.
curve of Magento is just so overwhelming to them. Where on Shopify, it's like this super easy, awesome software to use, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, great, I have all these apps that I can use to kind of add features and quickly, grow the business to 5 million or 10 million. So I think it's to us, it's about revenue. Like, what's the best to help them grow their revenue? And a lot of times the answer is Shopify because of the simplicity. It has there are problems, but those problems are outweighed by all the advantages of the simplicity.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question, Sam. If you have another or follow up, let me know. If anybody else has a question, keep posting those in the chat. We'll come to those as we see them. So let's get back to headless, because
Sure.
headless is interesting to me because it removes a lot of the advantages of open source
Yep.
software, especially on the front end. And
Yep.
so, obviously, this is where the world's going is PWA. Doesn't
Yep.
have to be PWA, but a headless implementation, probably on a progressive web app.
Yep.
And so, is that the real secret to scaling Shopify at this point? Like, if you were
I
going
think
to
that's
do,
part of it.
yeah,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
think that's part of it. I think that once you hit kind of and obviously revenue doesn't mean everything, but like I think we're seeing once you kind of get into that like 10 to or really 20 to 50 million dollars online on Shopify, there's usually the complexity of that. You start to run into some sort of scalability issues, and a lot of these people don't want to necessarily go to Magento or another platform. And a better way to potentially scale is to just migrate the front end to headless. And then it does open up this whole can of worms, because then you're like, well, what if we just have the apps go straight into the headless front end? What if you have your ERP go straight into the front end? And then it's like, what are you even doing with the e-commerce platform? At that point, it's just a PIM, right? And a checkout. So that's where we're kind of interested to see how this all plays out, because when you go headless, it's going to kind of change the paradigm of these e-commerce platforms. And yeah, it's still so
Yeah,
early, we don't even know how that's going to play out.
that is kind of the interesting counter is that, like Magento's PWA Studio, they're building that kind of tightly integrated with Magento. But for the most part, if you want to build headless on Shopify or BigCommerce or any platform that's not building a reference implementation, then you're on your own. You either write it from scratch or there's a third-party module that does it. The problem with third-party modules is, for the most part, they're designed to be cross-platform so that you can build like one site. Theoretically, you could wake up one morning and say, I want to be on a different back end, and you could migrate the back end and change your integration point and move over, like theoretically. But if you do that, if you go third party, I feel like you lose a lot of the functionality of each platform, because almost everybody builds like this vanilla middleware layer. Like a lot of
Yeah.
the options out there now are just using Elasticsearch as the integration point, because the integration's already there and they've just got to write an integration with Elasticsearch. So how do you
Yeah.
see this whole PWA playing out? Like which
Absolutely. Yeah,
which way do you
that's a
think
very
we'll be 5 years from now?
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we've been exploring viewstorefront.io. I don't know if you've ever seen. Have you seen
Sure,
View Storefront? I think it's by
of course.
Devante. So we thought they did a decent job with, specifically for Magento is what we explored with them, and I think that they're onto something there. But to your point, we evaluated it for Shopify, and we felt like because it was so well built for Magento, it didn't really make sense for us to use it for Shopify, because it was like we'd have to like re-architect it to the point where we're like, might as well start from something different. So
Right.
basically exactly what you're saying is that because it was kind of initially intended for something else, it made it not really the right choice for Shopify given what we were evaluating. Um, yeah, I don't think that there's like, that's why we're kind of like still taking an agile approach. Like we don't have like, oh, we're going all in on this platform right now. Like
Right.
to us, it was very obvious that Magento and Shopify, we could bet on those. Like we bet on those years ago and we're happy with that bet. I don't think there's any bet right now that anyone can say like, this is going to be like even Magento PWA Studio. I've seen a lot of the criticism of that. And I think it's still to be seen if that's going to be what people really use or they go with Vue Storefront or whatever. I know like there's a couple other ones out there from Magento. So I think it's like still kind of, you still kind of have to just evaluate, and that's what we're doing and just trying to figure out what we think is the best at the right time in the market. But with Shopify specifically, we decided we're actually, we're building our own kind of open source tool just because we felt like there was nothing out there that we were ready to use that we were confident in. So basically, we're kind of building it ourselves. So that as soon as that comes out, I'll send you the link and
Let me know.
you can
We'll
check
come
it
back.
out.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, feel free to criticize it and let us know what's good or bad about it.
Okay.
So
We've got a question. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying we've got a question in the chat, but I want to touch on a similar point, and then I'll get to Kevin's question in the chat here.
Sure.
How is Shopify's GraphQL coverage? If you're trying to build a PWA to scale, how is their coverage? Are you having to use REST API? Like, what does that look like?
Their coverage has been pretty solid so far. To be honest, that's probably a better question for our director of front end engineering who's been architecting this. But so far, I've been kind of like evaluating from a higher level than he is, and we haven't really seen too many scalability issues yet. But I think the GraphQL is still early. Like it's still, I think we're seeing that with every software at this point. Like GraphQL is still kind of early in its infancy. So is it too early to use it? It's kind of on that border to me. Like I think in a year or two, it'll be strong for most of these more modern software. But right now it's kind of like in the very early stages. So yeah, we're still relying on REST APIs for a lot of stuff.
Okay. And Kevin's question touches on an important thing for us. This is literally the single most important factor when we were looking at what SaaS platform to support. We were looking at BigCommerce. We were looking at Shopify. This was the number one factor on the board as to why we chose BigCommerce. And his question is, on the limitations of Shopify Plus that we often hear is the API call limitations with merchants with the need to integrate several systems, ERP, PM, shipping, etc. Compared to a Magento or BigCommerce implementation, is that a valid concern?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some concerns. I know like their rate limiting, they say is like 4%, whatever the number is, it's like a lower number than what BigCommerce will say. From what I've seen, it also seems like with Shopify Plus, there might be some negotiation capabilities there. I haven't really seen it be an issue in terms of scaling revenue too much. I mean, like I said, I think at this point we feel comfortable bringing companies up. Like to me, it's about revenue. Can we get you up to 50 to 100 million in revenue online? And we haven't seen that become enough of a scaling issue to be concerned yet.
Well,
So
for
it's
us,
possible. Yeah.
well, for
Sorry,
us, we do a lot of automotive.
Yeah.
Usually huge SKU counts. And
Yeah.
so with that, you're moving a lot of data and you're updating that data regularly. Like they get updates
Yeah.
almost daily for that data. And so, if you've got hundreds of thousands of SKUs that you're having to update almost daily from a pricing standpoint or description, like you don't know what data's in there.
Yeah.
Shopify has like a 4 per
Yeah.
second API limit, whereas BigCommerce is like 400.
I think you can
That's a
talk to
big
them.
difference.
From what I've heard, you can talk to the Shopify Plus team, and I think they have some control over that. I don't want to speak too much for them because I think that's kind of like on their side. Like you'll be talking to them later and see what they say if supposedly you can negotiate on that. But I agree. I mean, I think that could, if you have like a huge data set, then that is definitely a concern. But once again, it kind of goes back to revenue. Like you could have a million. I know a company literally that has a million SKUs and they don't do very much volume on their website. So
Right.
once again, we're kind of looking at, so most of the use cases that we're looking at that we're scaling, they don't have, half a million SKUs or even 100, like typically on the larger size, we're talking 10,000 or 20,000 SKUs or 30,000 SKUs. So if you're talking about that, is this kind of more of like a B2B use case? Like a
No,
B2B?
most of it's B2C, but it's just heavy data, right? It's you
Yeah.
know, a lot you API, the problem you have is that with a SaaS platform, every single interaction with that platform is an API interaction for the most part.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to plug in a search provider, it's going to be hitting your APIs. If you're
Yeah.
going to plug in
Yeah.
ERP integrations, it's going to be hitting your APIs. And if you need to move a lot of data, that limit will affect performance and
Yeah, if
scale.
you're trying to move the data that way, yeah, if you're trying to automatically update, and you're talking about like they need to update like their entire catalog's prices on like a batch import process or something like that,
Yeah,
like
that's part of it.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah, some sort of process. Well, could they do it on like a only what's changing now? Like if it's just what's
Not really.
changing,
Sometimes,
yeah,
sometimes they can, sometimes they can't.
gotcha,
Sometimes it's possible. You know, there are sources that provide these products have changed. There are
gotcha,
sources that just say, "Here's our updated catalog."
gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I know. I mean, Staples Canada is on. You know, they have a pretty huge catalog, but I don't know how much. We actually helped with one of the integrations on that site, but I don't know how much is actually being updated on a daily basis. Like, I'm not sure if they're. You know, we don't work with them at this point currently, so I know they have a large catalog, but I don't know if they're like updating it on a daily basis. They might just be doing it more.
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion that if you're Staples Canada or you're Kylie Jenner or you're some really high profile logo that Shopify is going to be able to use to promote their system, that the rules are a little different for you.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. I think there's a little bit of negotiating power potentially with the API limits, and obviously Shopify doesn't want to lose a deal because it says they can only do 4 per second or whatever it is, versus BigCommerce who can, claims they can do a lot more than that. So, yeah, I agree with you there. I think there's some negotiating power there. So,
Yeah.
um,
And it's one of those things that's kind of interesting because I think Shopify does this on purpose. I think they throw kind of red herrings out there. They throw decoys. They say, okay, here's our limits, and this is the limit if you're on a basic plan. Here's our pricing, and we're going to charge this roughly in transaction fees. And then when you're trying to sell against them on enterprise deals, they completely cave on a lot of that stuff or negotiate. And it makes you, because you're in your sales process harping on all of these obvious things they've thrown out there, when they
yeah,
can just when they can smooth over those obvious things, then they win the deals. I really think it's salesmanship at its finest.
yeah, but I mean, you could say that about all the platforms. You talk to them, they never really like, especially if they want to win the deal, they're not going to charge you the list price. They always change the
No, no,
price,
there's
and they,
always negotiation, but what
yeah,
I think Shopify does great is put out these obvious things that people like us get on videos and complain about. But then when you're actually negotiating with Shopify, they
yeah,
soften all of those things. And those are
yeah,
the
yeah,
things that Big Commerce is going to be talking about. Oh, you don't want to deal with that Shopify transaction fees. That's going to raise your costs. And you don't want to deal with that. And these
yeah,
API
yeah, yeah,
limits, you don't want to deal with that. And then you get in there and Shopify's like, okay, we'll raise your API limits and these fees. Yeah, but what we're going to do is cap your actually monthly cost, and your total cost of ownership still cheaper than the other platforms. And then they win. They literally win. Like, they throw stuff out there for the other platforms to sell against, and then they use that to their advantage in their sales process.
yeah. Well, I think they've also just built such a strong reputation, and they have such a strong momentum that people are looking at it as an option almost all the time now.
Oh
And then
yeah.
once you start talking to them, they're obviously going to work with you to try and win the deal. So, but I think that the catalog size is definitely an interesting, like that catalog update, batch process update issue is definitely an interesting scalability issue. I mean, I would say I don't think we've pushed the limits from what we think we can do, like at Trellis. Like I'd be curious to see, like, hey, can we get 500,000 or 1 million? What is the limit that we think we can do? And I don't think we've hit that yet. And probably
Right.
that's because the people that have that typically don't go with Shopify.
I
So
understand. We've got a few questions in the chat here. Keep those questions coming. We're going to start rolling through these. Some of these are topics I wanted to touch on anyway, so it's great. All right. So Robert in the chat here. Robert, thanks for the question. He asked what happened with Jeffree Star Cosmetics. And I'll touch on this in a minute, and I'm going to ask you a related question. But Jeffree Star Cosmetics, basically, it's one of those kind of very rare events where he completely shut the platform down. And honestly, you can blame Shopify for that, whatever, but I'm not sure he would have fared much better on any other platform. Like, it's one of those things where you don't know how big it's going to be until it happens. And then next time you prepare for what happened last time, and then it's even bigger. And then you prepare for, what happened last time, and it's even bigger. And he just continues to grow those launches a lot, maybe even through all of the publicity that comes from him shutting down the platform. But my question to you is, Jeffree Star, just to make sure everybody that's watching understands, he's a extremely popular beauty YouTuber. And he comes out with these limited release makeup kits, palettes, and he drops them on his Shopify store, and they sell out in hours, like millions and millions of dollars in sales in hours. And so if you had a client come to you, if Jeffree Star came to you and said, we need to figure this out for the next launch, how would you build that site?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for one, we would, if we knew the volume like that, we would definitely talk to the platforms. Like, we would say, hey guys, like, can you handle, 1,000 checkouts an hour, whatever the math comes out to, right?
Right.
And it sounds like, for whatever reason with Shopify, they didn't have that conversation, or they just didn't know, like you said. I think the problem is they didn't know and how popular it would get. And I think you're right. They would have that same problem. They'd build this site, even if it was on Magento, right? They'd have like, one server on Magento, and then find out they needed like 10 or 20 or whatever it is, or some sort of crazy, like, different scalability, hosting setup than what they might have started with. So I think we would just explore the platforms with them. Well, for one, it's like, what is the use case? If it's just transaction volume, like, it sounds like their site's not that complicated, correct?
No, it's a very simple site, not a ton of SKUs. It is literally one or two products, maybe five on a launch, and it's just extreme traffic for a short period of time.
So it sounds like forget the traffic side. It sounds like a great use case for Shopify. Like, simple site, like, that's the type of stuff where we're like, yes, this is Shopify. Like, we would usually just say, like, great, we'll build you a nice theme, and here you go. Here's your site on Shopify, and it's usually a pretty simple project. But yeah, I think we just have to talk to the Shopify Plus team about the order volume. And that's one of those ones where maybe we have to investigate the progressive web app, because obviously there's some potential to scale that a little bit faster with just using the front end of the PWA. Like, I think Ryan's been working really hard to, like, make sure all the scores are 100 on the framework that he's using on, like, the speed test and stuff like that. So it's really just an analysis, and that's what we do with any project. Is like, we do like a pre-sales analysis, and then even after they've committed to us, we still do an architecture and discovery process. And in that process, we want to make sure, like, okay, this is definitely going to work. But if we don't know the order volume of what it's going to be, and it turns out to be 100 times higher than what he said it's going to be, like, we might have made the wrong decision too,
Yeah, so, the problem is when it shuts down the site, it's hard to tell how big the volume was. Like, it's really hard to understand. Once it grinds to a halt, then your data is inaccurate after that. So it's hard to really know how big it was.
Was it the main? Because the checkout is very locked down. So I'm curious to know if it was like just the traffic of the site was crashing the site itself, or like checkout was literally broken and you couldn't actually place an order. Like,
I'm not 100% sure, but if you went to the site, it was a broken site. Like, you literally could not view the site properly. It was, you'd get a little bit of stuff here and there.
That would be like some app conflict or something that, like, the theme was built like crap, or there was like,
it's next level from that. Like, it may be that, but then the last time they did it, they literally queued people up. And you would be like 20,000th or 30,000th in line to even be able to check out.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And so
this is how I would. Go ahead.
Did they decide to move off Shopify? Like, I don't know what they ended up doing.
I don't think so.
So
I think
they built a queue system.
They put a
essentially.
queue system on it, yeah, which is,
Wow.
I guess less than ideal, but better than it crashing. But how I would do it, this is how I would do it. I would make sure you had the scale. I would build a standalone Gatsby PWA because
Yeah.
Gatsby is basically, fully compiled. It pulls all of the data over, all the products. So when somebody loads that page, all of the product data and everything needed to navigate the site is already in the browser. Obviously,
Yeah.
images and stuff pulled from a CDN, but there's no API calls to load the products at that point. And
Yeah.
then the only real API calls are going to be create the cart, checkout.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, that's probably what if we had to do it on Shopify, we would definitely do some sort of PWA if you're talking about that kind of volume where it's basically like an offline tool where like once it's loaded, like it can pretty much just load without like on like 3G internet, you know what I mean? Like the worst
Yep.
connection possible or whatever. So I agree. I think you'd have to do something like that. But then you'd have to talk to Shopify Plus about their APIs and check out limits and
No, you
see
definitely
what
have to have them on board, and I think they're on board with that. I mean, that was a big black eye for them when it shut down. So I'm pretty sure they had their attention.
Yeah. But I'm totally with you. I think, whether it's that exact, architecture of PWA or a slightly different flavor that someone decides is better, I think that's the exact direction that I think you would need to take.
Yep. Limit
So,
the API calls. Put all of the processing on the browser. I think
yeah.
that's your best
Yeah.
option there.
And then Chrome
Still,
breaks, and then you're screwed.
well, I mean, there are problems. You can have technical glitches there, especially when PWA is still. I don't want to say it's unproven technology, but it's an unknown commodity for a lot of people, a lot of developers, a lot of
Yeah.
platforms. All right,
Yeah.
so
Can I
keep
ask you a
going.
question on that real quick?
Sure,
What
go ahead.
what do you like? We've kind of like just gone with Vue.js as our preferred because we
Okay.
feel like it's a little easier to train developers and it's just like a little bit easier to like it's this new paradigm, right? So we just felt like it was the easiest of the three major ones, but I'm curious which one you liked of the three.
We chose React really because PWA Studio. That was,
Yeah.
we were kind of having those same deciding factors. And, it's really my concern with a third party app is that it's not going to support Magento functionality out of the box, all of the Magento functionality out of the box.
Yeah.
It's going to have a vanilla middleware. They want to support multiple platforms, and that's not wrong. That's a good business decision for them. I think that's the right decision for them. But what I want is as much of the core Magento functionality out of the box with the reference implementation, which is not there yet. But for instance, B2B functionality. I think
Yeah.
PWA has bigger B2B implications than B2C right now.
Yeah, I
With
agree with that.
just traditional, because most people now are not thinking of what PWA capabilities are. They're thinking
Yeah.
of how do I make a traditional website slightly better? And if we're going to make it slightly better, the ability to add it to your screen and those notifications, all of that stuff is going to play much better in a B2B space where somebody might actually put all of the apps they use on their phone and want those notifications. Whereas
Yeah.
consumers are going to get tired of that crap really quick and they're going to delete your app anyway. So that type of stuff would come better and quicker from Magento themselves than it would
Yeah.
be a third party app that's trying to service every platform.
I think
And
we're still
so
waiting to see it grow a little bit more. I think it's still very early
it's
stages of
young.
what they
It is
Yeah.
very young,
Yeah.
but long term, that's the horse I'm betting on. Is
Yeah.
that the
Well,
PWA
it's fine.
Studio implementation is going to be cheaper for us to build on because it's going to be more tightly coupled to Magento
What's
functionality.
your date? What's your bet on the date? Because I think you could be right, but what 2021, 2022,
Like if you're
2020?
if you're building if you're building a PWA right now, I don't think it matters because by the time there's a clear winner, it'll be time to rebuild the site.
Yeah. That's kind of how I feel too. So we're talking years. We're talking.
Oh yeah, I mean before it's a clear winner. Now I
Yeah.
already think it's obviously it has some issues. It's not perfect. It's still in development. It's not there's no B2B functionality. There's no Magento enterprise functionality. Like they're trying to
Yeah.
get it on par with Magento open source basic theming. So how long is that going to be? I think that could happen this year. that it's
Yeah.
functionally on par with the open source version of the platform's basic theme. Now, then what does that mean for next year? B2B functionality, some enterprise page builder, stuff like that being rolled into it. And once you've got page builder, once you've got B2B functionality, it would be very difficult for me to suggest you go to another platform unless that platform has those capabilities as well. And then if those, like, I think View storefront, stuff like that, have huge advantages on SaaS where they're not doing a reference implementation. But on Magento, I feel like you're going to go PWA Studio. Now the problem with that is if you support multiple platforms, now you got to support multiple front end PWA implementations. So someone like yourself may choose a View storefront, so it doesn't matter the platform, and you don't need different developers, different skill sets. So I understand that strategic advantage, but then you're kind of at the mercy of what that platform decides to do, unless you're going to try to build those integrations yourself. And maybe that's a huge advantage. If you build a page builder integration with Magento on View storefront and you don't share it with the world, then maybe you've got an advantage. So there's a lot of business decisions there to be made.
There's so many decisions to be made, but I agree with you. I think and they're hard decisions to make. But anyways, let's get to these questions.
Yes, we got more questions here, and we've got about 13 minutes left in the stream. Nolan in the chat says, can you comment on how multi-language works? I hear it's discrete and separate sites, catalogs. How do you manage that? How about multi-currency? And we touched on that a little bit, but this is good to frame it kind of in that context.
This is definitely one of the, we're actually exploring like a major rollout right now, like a global rollout, actually two global rollouts. So there's certainly no easy answer. Like it is a problem that they don't have a native feature for that. So there's like a few routes we're looking at. One is, you could just use an app. There's some apps that'll do it that we've actually used, like a multi-currency app. So you can have one store, but it can change the currency. Obviously, there's limitations with that, and that doesn't necessarily get you all the way there. I think the real answer to do it right is you do have to go with a multi-store. You have to build a store for each region, and then whether you use a translation app or do your own translations, that's kind of one of those decisions that you just have to decide, like, is this translation? There's a lot of translation apps out there, and you have to decide, like, is this worth it? And then obviously if you go with the different stores, then currency is not an issue. You can just set up the currency for the different store. But this is where the PWA becomes so important, because managing 20 different themes is going to be hard. You're annoying to manage all these code bases versus having one PWA, like, parent infrastructure with maybe some nuances per country. And then the stores just roll up to it from the back end. So that's kind of what we're thinking about from a front end architecture, it's just the PWA side of things. But I think you kind of have to go with the multi-store if you want to do it right. And so by multi-store, I want to be clear, that's different stores in Shopify.
That's where it gets really kind of muddled and convoluted, though. Like, literally, say PWA, for instance. You're going to put, you've got 5 regions you want to support. So you're going to have 5 different Shopify sites, completely unique, with different checkout, different users, different sessions. Then you're going to have to tie each one of those into your back office, because anybody I'm dealing with that is trying to do multi-language, multi-currency, they've got ERPs, they've got, order management, they may have PIMs, but they're not just like using Shopify alone. They've got a back office suite. And so
there's a lot to figure out. We've
got to fan that out into 5 different sites. And then if you're going to pull a PWA, you got to pull those back together into one PWA. So you fan out your data and then you pull it back together into one, whereas you could do that on one install of Magento.
Yeah, you could, but keep in mind, with Magento, you have to look at the challenges that customers have. Like, I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad idea to do it on Magento, but at the same time, we're seeing so much success on Shopify, and people are growing and managing the site to have such high volumes in revenue. And we're seeing people struggle with that on Magento. And I think it's not because Magento can't do it. It's because they don't have the internal skill sets to manage it. And I don't think they ever will anytime soon unless they completely change their culture as a company. It's almost like a cultural issue. Like if you were the merchant, great. Like we could probably work with you and build some amazing Magento site, but they don't have people employed like you. They have people that
Right.
are logging. They'd prefer to have this more cumbersome thing just so that they can log into these individual stores and manage it and do a better job that way.
I
So
completely agree with that for a lot of merchants. My argument though
yeah,
is once you're at scale enough to where you're trying to do 4 or 5 different geographies, languages, you're trying to do,
yeah,
you're at a scale to where it technically, if I have to write these integrations as custom apps and then I have to write a custom PWA, I've got a technology stack that's got to be maintained and groomed anyway. Like it's
yeah,
not like you did not
yeah,
simplify
yeah.
your life technically.
The important part of that is that they can rely on someone like us to manage that. And then their piece is just living in Shopify, which is easy for them. So the problem that we'll see with Magento is that people have a hard, like, you could like break your entire Magento site in Magento admin panel, like pretty, like they can kind of like really screw things up and just like make it hard. And there's just so much consulting and time that might go into that with them, depending on who the customer is. Whereas they can kind of outsource all of that complexity to someone like us. Even if that's a little more expensive than if we did it with Magento, they might be okay with that because, hey, I don't have to worry about anything else. I just like log into my Shopify and these apps and run my
So
business.
for the most part though, is that on us as developers for not just setting proper bumpers and permissions so that the customer doesn't log in and see this
Yeah, there's
overwhelming
definitely like a
configuration of
training.
stuff?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that for sure, but I think we've gotten, this is where I think it gets really interesting. We've started to like think much more deeply about like the culture of the company and are they actually ready to handle, and when like this software, what we're noticing is that certain types of companies do a better job with Magento, certain types of companies just can't handle it. And even if we have to build this, maybe more complicated architecture in some ways with Shopify, it's better for them because we handle that all. They don't have to worry about that. They don't
Right.
have to worry about this like, as long as it works, right? And they'll submit a ticket to us or whatever if they need something to be added. But so do you see what I'm getting at? Because I think that there's like
No, 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 it's you're doing exactly what we're doing as well these days, and it's great that you bring that up. It's not as much. I mean, the technology behind what they need matters, but the company and their capabilities and level of sophistication matter just as much.
I'd almost say that matters more than anything, right? Like, and what we're
Well, if you
seeing is
can't do it
that,
over there, you can't do it over there. But
yeah,
it's at least on equal footing. If you can go either way, then that becomes the defining characteristic,
yeah.
right? It's
So I think that,
the the company's culture becomes the characteristic that defines where the project goes.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because I think that what we're seeing is there's some that are just like an obvious Shopify, right? It's like you have 1,000 SKUs, your B2C. It's like, why would you not go with Shopify? Like that's a great solution. We can, but then you get into the middle ground where like you want globalization, but Magento might be better. But then culturally, it's like, can they handle that on Magento, or is it better for us to
Right.
just help them do it on Shopify? So, anyways, I know we're running out of time. So,
Hey, we've only got one more question here that I see.
okay.
All right, we've got Travis showing up over on YouTube. Travis, thanks for the comment on YouTube. The conversation's been kind of dead over on YouTube, but we've got a decent conversation going over on LinkedIn at this point. Sam's question here, and I'm trying to make sure I understand that, but I think like what Sam's trying to ask here is what catalog size is Shopify good for? Magento has unlimited SKUs. Is there, and we touched on this a little bit, but do you think there's a catalog size, not just complexity? I know complexity matters, but just sheer
Yeah.
SKU volume where Shopify breaks down.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we haven't really seen it break down yet because I think that's because the people that have these massive catalogs probably aren't considering Shopify. But we've had success. I'll tell you where we've had success. We've had success with people, with 30,000, 40,000, up to like, I would say probably like 50,000 products. I'd say like up to that 100,000 is where I think there's not a whole lot of a difference if we probably try to grow that 50,000 to 60,000. Do I feel comfortable at this point saying you should use Shopify if you have over 100,000 SKUs? Can it do it? Probably, but we haven't done a lot with that yet. So I don't like it's. We're kind of going into Trellis unknown territory
Right.
once we go beyond 100,000 SKUs.
I think
So
that's kind of important, though, to denote. Like, there is probably a scale to catalog size. That's where we run into problems. That's why we chose BigCommerce, because I feel like technically with APIs and product SKUs, you can scale bigger than Shopify a little easier. Not to say it can't be done, but it's a little easier. But from a sales volume scale, I don't know if there is much of a limit to Shopify, especially if you get Shopify on board with that scale.
yeah, exactly, and that's what we really care about. It's like sales is what matters. Who cares if you have a million SKUs in your catalog and you don't make any money, right? So,
Well, yeah, but if
but
you have if you need a million SKUs to make all those sales,
yeah, of course,
it
yeah,
does
yeah,
matter.
yeah, it matters. And so I think it depends on the complexity though. Like I think the main issue you're going to run into once you have over 100,000 SKUs, or let's just say whatever the number is, then you're going to probably start having so many categories and attributes and all these different elements to the catalog, and that's where I think you might run into some issues with the way that Shopify is set up. So I think if you just had like a million SKUs that literally all were one category or whatever it is, I'm just making up an absurd thing, I think you'd be fine. But that's just never the case, right? So it's like it's all the other data that comes with the complex, like usually the larger the SKU count, the larger the categories are, the attributes,
Right.
and the other aspects of their data, and then that's where I think you might start to see some issues with that.
Absolutely. We've got a few minutes here. If you have a question, get it in. We got time for at least one more question here before we call it a morning and I get to go actually do some work because, I got to make a living. I got to make a living. I can't. I would just stream all day. This is work. Yes, I need to clarify for tax purposes, all of this whiskey is a tax write-off, so I need to make sure I'm very clear that this is work.
I think
Okay.
you need to get this so popular that your sponsorship is worth so much money that you can just do it all day.
Talk to me in a year. Talk to me in a year. I think we'll be close. So we've got some plans there. All right. So we've got Matt in the chat here. That rhymes. I'm a poet. Matt's going to give us a little bit of a hard time here. Matt's with Work Area. I don't think he's a big fan of Shopify, but let's go. I hear a lot of Shopify can probably, but have talked to plenty of folks who bought that line and got stung by empty promises like that. Shopify hasn't proved itself as capable of doing complex business at scale. Shopify's uptime guarantee is 99.99%, right? But in the fine print, that doesn't apply to custom themes or apps. And yet the answer to can Shopify do enterprise is without custom themes and apps. It sounds like I need to have Matt on here to talk about. Matt, hit me up, DM me. I feel like Matt may need a little bit of therapy, a little bit of counseling, and he's got some good points and some good information.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think it comes down to the implementation partner and the people that are working on the software. Like, to be honest, our success rate is really high with Shopify. It's us doing the justice to the customer. Like, hey, we feel confident we can pull this off, and if we can't, we messed up. We made a wrong decision for that company. So, I mean, you could say that about anything though. Like you could say like Magento doesn't support a custom theme. If you build a crappy Magento custom theme, the site's going to suck. So it's really like, how well are you doing of a job of scaling Shopify from a technology standpoint? Just like you could say the same thing about all these other platforms. Are there definitely limitations? For sure. But I think we can push them pretty far. Like I think that we can get to some pretty large volumes of revenue in terms of crazy use cases of these massive catalogs. I'd love to experiment more with that. I wish I could give you more honest answers on like a million SKUs. I just haven't done that.
yeah.
But we have that issue with Magento too, though. Like, I mean, we've seen sites that have struggled with 70,000 SKUs on Magento because of the way that they had, like, I'll give you an example. They had like a CSV, right? That's how they manage their data, and they want us to like batch import from their CSV. Like, they're not going to change from that. And they don't have they've started to modernize their PIM or whatever, but it's still very limited the way that we can get the data into Magento. So it's still a problem. Like, do you see where I'm going with this? Like, all the
Yeah.
problems are still kind of the same. Yeah, there's limitations to the APIs and certain things, but you could still have crappy technology on any of these platforms. If you do a good job, you can scale.
Now, do you
So
have a couple of minutes to go over? I want to touch on one more thing there that Matt brings up. Have you got? I
yeah,
want to be respectful of your time. A
absolutely.
few
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
First of all, we got Eric Heilman in the chat over on YouTube. Hey, Eric, I ran the commercial at the beginning, guys. If you need Magento hosting, call Mage Mojo, because hosting sucks, and you need a good partner to take that crap off your hands so you can just relax and drink some good whiskey, which I'm almost out of here.
I wish I brought my drink. I should have got a drink this time.
Apparently somebody doesn't watch the content. I see. I understand. It's okay. It's all right. I'm good with it. But no, Matt brought up a good point. And something we haven't talked about, something I don't really think about a lot, is with a SaaS platform, any SaaS platform, and Shopify is particularly vulnerable to this with their API limits. To scale Shopify, you do not have to scale Shopify. You have to scale Shopify and all of the apps you have plugged into that site.
Yes,
Whereas with
yes.
Magento, you've got, there may be some particular apps that connect to third-party systems that you have to worry about, but a lot of the modules are living on Magento. So they will, if properly developed, scale with Magento, and you can work those out. With a third-party app, you don't have access to scale. They either scale or they don't scale. They either fix their scale or it's a problem for you and you have to turn that off. And so how do you
Yeah.
deal with that or think about that if you're considering Shopify for scale? And you want, the whole point of Shopify is I've got all these marketplace apps. I can throw all this functionality on. I don't need developers. It's cheap. I don't have to worry about all this headache. And then as soon as you start doing some volume, shit falls apart.
Yeah, and once again, like, what is volume? I mean, we're having a lot of success with pretty solid volumes of revenue. Yeah, the way I would think about that is, I mean, I disagree that with Magento it's just like you don't have to worry about that. I think you have just as much to worry about that on Magento as you do on Shopify. We have like a bad list of bad vendors for all the platforms that we've seen.
There are bad
with.
modules, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So you have to just be conscious of what the modules are and how well they scale. And what we've done in some cases is if we run into a scalability issue with a module, then we just look at other options. We say, okay, so in the Shopify case, we say there's an app that might be doing something. In some cases, we might say, hey, like, we can just write something custom that's a little bit simpler for this specific functionality and just scale it that way. So we just look at ways to kind of find alternatives to the apps that we're seeing issues with. But it's the same problem that we run into with Magento. And we've seen module issues with Magento. And when you have 20 modules and then you try and go and upgrade Magento, it gets really expensive. So you're going to have technical debt in any platform. And it's just a matter of how you overcome that technical debt. And yeah, there's a certain point where maybe you might say, hey, like, this actually is better on Magento. But I think that ceiling is higher than people think. That's what I think is maybe the misconception. I think if you have good developers and a good strategy and good architecture, the ceiling is probably a lot higher than some people think. Just if you just look at face value of reading these numbers versus actually going and doing it and seeing it happen, I think the ceiling, like I said, I mean, we're seeing 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million sites that are very happy, very successful with Shopify. And I can't confidently say that we would have got them there on another platform.
Right. I definitely think it's a myth that was true at one point, and it just hasn't, they haven't been able to kind of shuck that perception just yet. So with that, Matt, I've got one thing for you, Matt. We're gonna call this a day, but I got one thing for you, Matt. You brought this up. So work area commerce. I want to know, either with an e-commerce platform, you either have no app marketplace whatsoever, or the scale of a site somebody uses is dependent upon that app marketplace. So how does work area, if you don't like how Shopify handles it and you don't think the apps on that marketplace scale, how is Work Area going to ensure that all of the third-party providers around that platform can reach the same scale as the core platform? How are you better? I want you to let me know in the comments if we end up ending this stream before you get it typed out. Let me know. You should be able to comment on the video after it is posted.
Let me say one last thing about that, because I think what is scale, right? I think we need to think about scale as maybe two things: revenue and like complexity of catalog and database and functionality, right?
Right.
But the main thing that matters for businesses is revenue. And right now, Shopify is winning that game. They have the most revenue growth of any businesses. And as their businesses are growing and generating more revenue, there's more complexity. And we're handling that complexity. So for us, it's like, until we start to see those things become untenable and we just can't keep these customers going, we're going to keep going in that direction. And they've been doing it. So that's kind of the point that I think is important, is to think about that. So.
All right, sounds good. Well, I appreciate you coming on. If you would, tell everybody how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, just go to our website, trellis.co, trellis.co. Send us an email. You can easily contact us on the website, and we should respond pretty quickly. So you can also find me on LinkedIn or Twitter pretty easily. I should be one of the easiest people to find with my name, Isaiah Bollinger, on social media, since I don't think anyone shows up besides me.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody watching today. We're trying to get back into regular live streams. We've got a big live stream next Friday. It should already be posted on the YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, if on LinkedIn, I can't schedule things ahead, but I did post about it. We're going to have actually someone from Shopify Plus coming on and talking about, the flexibility of their platform. Like I want to dispel these myths or get to the bottom of how they may be factually accurate. We want to cut through a lot of the sales and marketing BS that everybody is putting out there for all of these platforms, because ultimately we want merchants to make the right choice for them so that their business can prosper and grow. So I appreciate you watching, and I will see you next week.